The moment itself is quiet. No flash in the sky. No warning from science. No de vaina non cement. People simply stop dying. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Death does not retreat with spectacle. It fails in small, confusing ways. A heart stops and starts again. A body crushed in an accident refuses to complete the process. Bleeding continues, pain continues, but the final threshold is never crossed. At first, doctors think it is error. Monitors malfunction. Records conflict. Pronouncements of death are delayed, then retracted. Patients who should be gone remain. Unconscious, damaged, but present. Hospitals become cautious, then alarmed. Still, the world assumes normality. There have been medical anomalies before. Rare survivals. Statistical outliers. Nothing that rewrites reality. News reports frame the events as miracles, then as mysteries. People watch, curious but detached. The illusion holds because death has always been expected. It has rules, patterns, reliability. Humanity has built entire systems on the assumption that bodies eventually stop. Then the pattern breaks. Accidents increase without conclusion. Emergency rooms fill with people who cannot be declared dead but cannot recover. Pain persists. Trauma accumulates. Bodies refuse to resolve. Funerals stop. Not because grief disappears, but because closure does. Families wait. Days turn into weeks. Machines keep people breathing who no longer improve or decline. The word critical loses meaning. Hospitals reach capacity. Triage becomes impossible when no one exits permanently. Doctors are forced to make decisions they were never trained for. Who receives care when no one leaves? Who gets relief when suffering has no endpoint? The first real panic begins there, not in the streets. In sterile rooms where medicine realizes it has lost its most basic function. Outside, people continue their lives until the news spreads wider. An elderly woman survives a stroke that destroys most of her brain. A man falls from a height that should end him and remains conscious, screaming, unending. Children survive illnesses that should take them quickly, but never fully heal. Death is not postponed. It is absent. The language collapses next. There is no word for this state. Alive is wrong. Dead is impossible. Doctors invent terms. Bureaucracy invents categories. None of them satisfy families watching loved ones exist without resolution. Religions fracture instantly. Some declare this the end of judgment. Others call it punishment. Others call it mercy twisted into cruelty. Congregations split. Faith becomes volatile. The fear spreads unevenly. Young people joke at first. Immortality memes spread. The idea feels distant, abstract, even exciting. If no one dies, then life is infinite. Then the first mass casualty event occurs. Crash. Collapse. Hundreds injured. None dead. Emergency systems fail immediately. Pain management runs out. Beds run out. Staff break down. The injured do not pass away. They remain locked in broken bodies that cannot release them. Witnesses are traumatized not by death, but by its absence. Suffering lingers. Governments respond too late. Emergency powers are declared. Research funding explodes. Scientists search desperately for a mechanism, a cause, a switch to flip back. Nothing responds. Biology behaves normally until the final moment, and then refuses to finish. The population begins to understand. This is not a gift. It is a trap. Crime changes overnight. Murder loses its meaning. Violence does not decrease, it transforms.
Torture become permanent.
Punishment becomes infinite. Legal systems collapse under questions they cannot answer. What is a life sentence when life has no end? Prisons overflow. Hospitals overflow. Cities feel heavier. Fear shifts from dying to being injured. Risk becomes unbearable when consequences cannot end. People stop driving, stop flying, stop working dangerous jobs. Infrastructure decays as no one is willing to risk permanent harm. Birth rates continue. That is the cruelest detail. Children are still born into a world where no one leaves. Population pressure builds immediately. Resources strain. Food systems buckle. Housing becomes impossible when no space is freed. Euthanasia is debated in whispers, then in public, then in desperation. But the methods do not work. The body refuses. The first riots are not about food. They are about relief. People beg for death the way past generations begged for life. Hospitals are stormed. Doctors are blamed. Scientists are threatened. The public demands an end to existence that will not end itself. The wealthy attempt escape. Bunkers, isolation, extreme safety. But immortality does not mean invulnerability. Injury still happens. Pain still accumulates. Isolation becomes another prison. The psychological toll becomes unbearable. Grief has no resolution. Love has no closure. Every goodbye is temporary and meaningless. The human mind, evolved to process loss, cannot adapt to endless presence. Suicide attempts rise. They fail. That is when the truth becomes undeniable. Death was not the enemy. It was the release valve. It was the structure that gave urgency meaning and suffering an end. Without it, life becomes a corridor with no doors. As the world staggers under infinite consequence, one realization spreads faster than panic, faster than denial. This was not immortality. It was the removal of mercy. And as humanity begins to understand what it has lost, it becomes clear that this is not a crisis that can be managed, negotiated, or adapted to. This is not a miracle. It is a fundamental loss, the loss of an ending. And without endings, nothing else makes sense anymore. Time passes, but nothing resolves. The world does not adjust gracefully. It hardens. Months turn into years, and humanity learns what endless consequence really means. Hospitals are no longer places of healing. They become warehouses of suffering. Rows of bodies remain suspended in states medicine was never meant to maintain. Machines hum endlessly, not preserving life, but preventing collapse that will never complete. Doctors leave in waves, not out of fear but despair. To heal is to aim toward recovery or release. When neither is possible, skill becomes cruelty. Those who stay numb themselves. Protocols replace compassion. Sedation becomes the most common treatment, not to cure, but to quiet. Society reorganizes around avoidance. Risk disappears from daily life. Construction halts. Exploration ends. Aviation shrinks to necessity only. Dangerous professions vanish or are automated. No one wants a permanent injury. A broken spine that never kills but never heals becomes worse than death ever was. Insurance systems collapse first. They were built on probabilities of death. Without death, cost becomes infinite. Coverage disappears. Healthcare becomes rationed brutally, not because of money, but because resources cannot circulate when no one exits the system. Governments enforce triage laws, not who lives, who receives relief. Pain management becomes a political issue. Access to sedation, coma-inducing drugs, sensory deprivation, these become the most valuable commodities on Earth. Black markets emerge instantly. People trade everything they own for unconsciousness. The phrase "rest in peace" becomes obscene. Religion fractures completely. Some cult-like movements celebrate endless life, preaching endurance as virtue. Others form death-seeking faiths, attempting ritualized endings that never succeed. Sacred texts are rewritten. Theology collapses under a reality where judgment never arrives. Marriage changes. Forever no longer sounds romantic. Commitment without an end becomes unbearable. Relationships dissolve under the weight of endless proximity. Love becomes seasonal, contractual, temporary by design. Parenthood becomes controversial. Bringing a child into a world with no escape feels unethical to many. Birth rates fall sharply, but never enough. Children grow up watching adults trapped in bodies that cannot finish suffering. They learn fear early, not fear of dying, fear of injury. Language evolves. Words like terminal, fatal, last disappear. New words emerge for states of irreversible damage without death. None of them feel adequate. Conversation grows cautious, heavy, restrained. Prisons become nightmares. Life sentences mean eternity. Inmates beg for execution. Judges hesitate to sentence at all. Justice systems freeze, unable to impose punishment that cannot conclude. Crime shifts toward coercion, containment, psychological domination. War becomes unthinkable, not because of morality, because permanent injury without death is too horrifying to deploy at scale. Conflicts stall into standoffs. Violence becomes localized, surgical, restrained by the fear of infinite consequence. Population pressure becomes unbearable. Cities swell without turnover. Housing becomes inherited by force. The young resent the old not for power, but for space. Generational conflict intensifies. Immortality without youth becomes grotesque. Bodies age, degrade, weaken, but never release. A new class emerges, the preserved, those who can afford extreme protection, medical maintenance, sensory control. They live carefully, slowly, minimizing risk. Their lives shrink into controlled environments. Immortality becomes claustrophobic luxury. The rest endure. Psychology breaks in stages. First denial, then bargaining, then rage, then numbness. Suicide hotlines close. There is nothing to advise. Hope becomes dangerous when there is no exit. Art changes tone. No tragedy, no heroic sacrifice, no final acts. Stories loop endlessly. Endings feel dishonest. Audiences lose patience for narratives that imply closure. Time itself loses shape. When nothing ends, beginnings feel meaningless. Ambition fades. Why rush? Why build? Why achieve when achievement never concludes in legacy? Only accumulation. Memory becomes a burden. People carry centuries of regret, resentment, unresolved love. Minds fragment under the weight of endless recall. Forgetting becomes a prized skill. Drugs that erase memory become more valuable than anything else. Eventually, humanity stops asking how to restore death. The question becomes whether consciousness itself can be turned off permanently. Research shifts, not to cure disease, to silence awareness. Projects begin on irreversible comas, locked in hibernation, sensory voids where thought itself fades. If death cannot return, oblivion becomes the substitute. The first successful cases are celebrated quietly. A person enters a state of permanent non-experience. Still alive, still breathing, but gone. The world exhales. This is not death, but it is close enough. Entire facilities are built for this purpose. Not prisons, not hospitals, sanctuaries of absence. People sign contracts choosing when to disappear into stillness. Families gather for farewells that are not funerals. Tears flow anyway. Closure returns in a new, diminished form. Humanity adapts by redefining ending, not as death, as withdrawal from experience. Looking back, historians will no longer debate whether stopping death was a blessing or a curse. They will agree on one thing: death was never the enemy of life. It was its boundary. Without boundaries, meaning dissolves. Choice loses weight. Pain loses dignity. By losing death, humanity did not gain eternity. It lost proportion. And so civilization survives, smaller, quieter, slower, a species that learned too late that infinity without mercy is not freedom. It is captivity. This was not the triumph over death. It was the end of forgiveness. And once forgiveness vanished, humanity learned the true cost of living forever.